could please raise your right hand. You swear the testimony that you're about to give will be the truth.
I do.
Please have a seat. Responding to questions first from Ms. Nicholson and perhaps also Mr. Fishburne, who's to your left. You may proceed with.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Would you please state and spell your name for the court reporter?
Sure. Jonathyn W. Priest, Jonathyn, Priest.
And Mr. Priest, how are you currently employed?
I'm a forensic analyst with Bevel Gardner and Associates.
And what do your typical duties consist of?
Predominantly consulting on cases and teaching.
And when you say consulting on cases, which type of cases are we talking about specifically?
I do all kinds of cases from around the country, defense cases, prosecution cases, mostly those involving law enforcement in some fashion.
And so when you say involving law enforcement, please tell us a little bit about your background.
I was a police officer with the City and County of Denver for 32 years. I began as a patrol officer. From there, went to the Vice and Narcotics Bureau, where I spent some time doing those types of investigations. From there, I went to the Auto Theft Bureau and began working on auto theft type cases. Because of my background in vice and narcotics, I went into the major investigations section of the Auto Theft Bureau, where we did things like cut shops and criminal enterprise types of things with stolen motor vehicles. From there, I went into the Crimes Against Persons Bureau, where I worked in the assault unit and did basic crimes against persons investigations, and from there moved into the homicide unit, where I spent time as a homicide investigator. And during that time, investigated all manners of death, homicide, certainly suicide, accident, natural, baby deaths, adult deaths, officer-involved shooting investigations, officer-involved critical incident investigations, in-custody death type of situations, and murder for hire. After that, I was promoted to sergeant. Went back to the street for a brief period of time, where that was a policy of the police department. When you're promoted, you go back to the street. But I wasn't there very long before they grabbed me and brought me down to the Internal Affairs Bureau, where I was doing internal investigations, police officers and things of that nature. But one of the reasons they grabbed me was to assist in developing some investigative protocols for the Internal Affairs Bureau.
And so let me stop you right there. So you stated that you spent some time, once you made it to the homicide unit, investigating officer-involved shootings and critical investigations.
Yes.
What specialized knowledge goes into conducting an officer-involved shooting investigation?
Certainly, one of the things that the Denver Police Department did, and many major cities do as well, is the homicide unit typically is involved in the investigation of officer-involved shootings. Those shootings began as criminal investigations. So they wanted more experienced or better trained investigators to do that type of investigation, and that's why we were doing that. Part of that training includes not only death investigations, but understanding major crime investigation protocols, major crime scene management, crime scene investigation techniques, interview and interrogation techniques, abilities to obtain and execute search warrants, arrest warrants, knowledge of probable cause, different things that would go into that for developing those expertise.
And in your training and experience, have you had an opportunity to participate in officer-involved shooting investigations?
No, hundreds.
Hundreds? Over how many years would you approximate?
Well, I began doing officer-involved shooting investigations about 1989 and continued until I retired in 2011.
Have you had an opportunity to help write or draft any police policy or procedures related to officer-involved shooting investigations?
Yes. When I was promoted to supervisor and went back to the homicide unit, I began working with our first assistant DA and a chief deputy district attorney in rewriting the policies and procedures related to officer-involved shooting investigations based on many of the things that we had learned through doing those, the development of our video interviewing protocols for critical incidents, homicide, officer-involved shooting, sex crimes, things of that nature. And we basically revamped the investigative protocols for the Denver Police Department.
And are those protocols still in place today?
They are.
And Mr. Priest, over your many decades in law enforcement, have you had the opportunity to teach officer-involved shooting investigation techniques to other officers?
I have.
And where have you taught those courses?
All over the U.S., California, Texas, Colorado, Florida, Nebraska, Washington State, Oregon, Nevada. I may have already said Nevada.
So it's fair to say you've taught officer-involved shooting investigation techniques to fellow officers all across the United States?
Certainly. I began doing that for our police academy in Denver, and I did that for as long as I was in the homicide unit. But after even prior to leaving the police department, I was teaching officer-involved shootings around the country.
And Mr. Priest, when did you leave the Denver Police Department?
October 2011.
And what have you been doing ever since then?
What I'm doing now, and that's teaching and consulting in cases with Bevel Gardner and Associates.
And have you had an opportunity, have you published any articles?
Oh, numerous. Predominantly for the Denver Police Department within that, but I've published articles in the area of association of crime scene reconstruction, in International Association Bloodstain Pattern Analysts.
And Mr. Priest, what is some special, do you hold any special certificates or?
I'm a certified bloodstain pattern analyst with the International Association for Identification, the IAI. I'm certified through Force Science Institute in critical incident management and officer-involved shooting investigations. I'm past president and past board member for the Association of Crime Scene Reconstruction.
And do you belong to any other professional organizations related specifically to criminal investigations or critical incidents?
Well, certainly the IAI, International Association for Identification, International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysts. I've already mentioned ACER, Association of Crime Scene Reconstruction. I'm a pseudo-member. Actually, I was just given the honor through the Association of Polygraph Examiners. Certified level 3 medical investigator through the American College of Forensic Examiners.
And John, and I noticed that primarily now that you are a forensic consultant or analyst, is that correct?
Yes.
And how do you normally receive your cases, or how do people seek you out to obtain your expertise?
Well, some of it is an agency may contact Bevel Gardner and Associates and say we're looking for an expert in X, and we'll get cases that way. Sometimes we're specifically requested by an organization. Could be a district attorney, could be a law enforcement agency, could be a defense attorney, could be a college, could be private citizen. Any number of people can contact us directly and ask for to review a case based on our background and expertise.
And so that brings me to my next question. You, in your expert opinion, you have been consulted by both prosecution, defense, law enforcement, various entities.
Yes.
And is that always related to officer-involved shooting investigations and critical incidents?
Some of them, but I also do bloodstain pattern analysis, shooting incident reconstruction, major case management, death investigations. I've consulted in all those areas.
And when it comes to officer-involved shooting investigations, and when you're making analysis, what is some of the information that you rely on?
Typically with a officer-involved shooting investigation, the things that I'm really interested in is the entire case file. I want all the information practical and possible that are related to the case file. Videos, statements, crime scene investigation, photographs, if a death occurs, autopsy, if a death doesn't occur, medical records. Oftentimes crime scene visits, sometimes access to the evidence for independent testing or research. Could be any number of those things. Just, it depends on the case.
And Mr. Priest, have you testified as an expert before in any jurisdiction?
Many times, yes.
Many times. Have you testified here in the state of Texas?
I have.
What other jurisdictions have you testified as an expert in?
Dallas, Austin, Bastrop, Hardeman County, Houston.
Any other states?
Oh, yes. California, Colorado, certainly, Virginia, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Wisconsin.
And have you testified in federal court before?
I have.
And do you believe, and now when it comes specifically to the reason that we're here in trial today, did we reach out to you and ask you to review the use of force by the defendant in this case?
Yes.
And did we provide you documentation in the case file so that you could make your independent analysis?
Yes.
And did you in fact review and conduct that analysis?
I did.
And do you believe that the testimony that you would have to provide before this jury would help aid them in understanding this defendant's use of force?
In my opinion, I do.
Pass the witness.
Good afternoon, sir.
How are you?
Good, nice to talk to you again. What field of expertise will you be bringing to the courtroom when you testify?
Well, much of it would depend on the type of questions that I get. Certainly, based on this particular case, I would imagine that expertise dealing with officer-involved shooting, officer-involved critical incident investigation, management, and analysis.
Let me catch up to you. Critical what?
Officer-involved shooting investigations, officer-involved critical incident investigation and management.
Let me stop you there. Critical incident, that means when there's a serious bodily injury or death, is that right?
Yes.
And officer-involved shooting doesn't necessarily mean anybody even got shot, right?
No, but the investigative protocols are similar. So it depends on the types of questions that may get asked.
All right, I'm just trying to keep up.
Okay.
All right,
So,
officer-involved shooting. So will you be testifying in the field of, for our purposes, use of force?
Certainly.
What else can you possibly envision that you would be asked to testify about in this case, based on what you've been given, what you've been asked to do?
The analysis of the actions of the officers.
Let me stop you there. Is that use of force part of that?
Could be.
All right. Well, I have to pin you down as much as I can so I can figure out if I have a quarrel with your qualifications. So the actions by the officers is part of your analysis, correct?
Yes.
Part of your use of force analysis, correct?
Yes.
And you're going to offer the opinion that Officer Hess was acted unreasonably, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So as part of forming the basis of that opinion, you'd be analyzing his actions, right?
Yes.
So far I've got officer-involved shootings and critical incident as your do I need to add anything for this case?
Tactics may come up,
Tactics?
certainly.
And what is that? Tactics. Describe that a little bit.
With any officer-involved critical incident, one of the things that is examined is the tactics employed by the officers. And part of the reason for that is determined not necessarily as part of the criminal investigation, because when I do or have done in best practices in dealing with officer-involved critical incident investigations, we would analyze not just the criminal element of this, but things that would affect or directly impact policy, would impact training, would impact procedure in those areas, and tactics would be one part of that.
If our scope is only about one historical event, the one that you've heard described as you sat here, tactics would not be part of your analysis, would it?
Well, I wouldn't want to limit myself if I get asked a tactical question. I certainly want to be in a position where I can respond to that.
Well, the field of tactics would have to be one that is whether the subject matter you're going to testify about would have to include tactics. And if you're only here to testify about whether Officer Hess acted reasonably, are you going to opine, if you're allowed to, about Officer Hess's tactics?
Well, not if I'm not asked a question about it, no.
Well, if you're asked a question, do you intend to opine about Officer Hess's tactics?
If I'm asked a question about tactics, I could opine about that.
And would you be confining your opinion only to Officer Hess's tactics, or would you be broadening that in any way as to what you think should be done, or what a training manual requires?
I would certainly compare it to the policies and procedures of the Dallas Police Department.
So if you're asked questions about tactics, you will compare Officer Hess's tactics to the general order of the Dallas Police Department, is that right?
Certainly, and the term best practices certainly may come up as well.
What does best practices have to do? I'm not sure.
Okay,
with this.
most law enforcement agencies, certainly large city law enforcement agencies, base their policies and create their policies and procedures on some best practice. And those best practices exist in major organizations like the International Association of Chiefs of Police or Police Executive Research Forum. Places like that develop those best practices that many agencies create and develop their policies and procedures.
Well, don't you agree with me that if we get into all of that, that could just be simply confusing and time-consuming for the jury?
Oh, absolutely. But again, if somebody were to ask me a question, I want to make sure that you understand I have a background in those areas.
Yes, sir. Now, when you're asked to testify in this case about critical incident management, did I get that right?
Yes,
Okay. If you're asked to testify about critical incident management, this would be a critical incident, correct?
certainly.
And so you'd be testifying about this incident in particular and giving your expert opinion about use of force, is that right?
Yes,
And you would be relying on the principles in the field of use of force to give that opinion, right?
yes,
All right. And only those principles, is that correct?
I think that's fair.
Now, let me ask you, you have been here throughout the trial so far, is that right, sir?
I have.
Did you interview Officer Evans?
I conducted no interviews, independent. I read statements and reports. I conducted no interviews.
Were you asked by the district attorney's office to conduct any interviews?
No,
Did you ask the district attorney's office if you could conduct interviews?
no.
Have you conducted interviews in other cases that you've testified about critical incident management and use officer-involved shooting?
Well, I have.
Okay. Did you read any statement given by Officer Evans?
Without going back through the materials, I can't say that I have or have not. If there was one provided me, then I would have reviewed that.
Did you bring the materials that you read with you?
I don't have them in front of me, no.
But you did bring them with you, correct?
I can access them.
Okay. Would you be so kind as to bring them with you tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm sure I can.
And you and I can take a look at what statements you read right quick.
Sure.
Okay. Let me ask you about the others and see if you have an independent recollection right now. Did you read the statement by Officer Linkwar? I'm sorry.
I don't recall seeing his statement. It's his name that is coming to mind. I don't recall seeing his statement.
Okay. We'll have to check that, right?
Yes.
How about Officer Hopkins? Did you read his statement?
Again, I don't recall that statement.
Meaning, as you sit here now, you probably didn't read it, or you just don't remember?
I don't know if I did or I did not.
Officer Alish?
Again, same thing.
Did you read any statement by Mr. Samples?
I know I read documents that had his name in it, and I don't recall if it was just a report or if it was something related to his statement, but I recall his name in the materials I looked at.
Video statements of anybody in this case?
Just one.
Which one?
The other individual in the vehicle at the time of the shooting.
Oh, Mr. Rosales.
Yes,
So you watched the video statement given by Mr. Rosales,
I did.
and did that factor in, as part of the things you considered in forming the opinions you will express?
And it was certainly something I watched.
What did it do?
Well, it wasn't a great statement.
Well, just so we can get through this, what made it not a great statement?
Judge, I'm going to object at this time that it's outside the scope of what this witness has testified to, that the Rosales' statement didn't have any real bearing on his analysis of the defendant's use of force.
Well, we don't know if it did or not. What made it not so great?
Well, the majority of the time he was sleeping. He was hard to understand on the video. His information was vague. It certainly didn't sway me one way or the other.
It didn't.
No.
You remained in the same position you were in prior to watching that interview?
Yes.
Now, you testified, I thought I heard it right, a few minutes ago, that you are certified by the Force Science Institute, is that right?
Correct.
And that means that you attended some training with those people, is that right?
Yeah, 40-hour course in San Jose, California, I believe.
Do you remember when that was?
I believe it was 2009, but I'd have to look to be sure, but I believe it was 2009.
And your certification for that is still in play?
It is.
Still good?
Yes.
How about the AELE? Have you attended anything with them, American Protective Law Enforcement?
I'm familiar with them. I know I have, and it's probably been better than 10 years ago that I attended anything with them.
And have you updated anything with them since that time?
Since I left the police department, I probably have not, but I have attended training with them.
Have you attended any training? When is the last time you attended any training seminars directly related to critical force management?
Any training?
Critical incident management. When's the last time you attended training specifically related to that topic? Or taught one?
Oh, taught one. I taught 3 of them last year. In Ohio, Colorado.
So would you regard teaching that class, would you consider that the same as attending the class?
Attending a class, typically you're getting updates or you're getting similar types of training. Many times when I go to classes like that, I'm looking at how they're doing, what they're doing. Are they doing anything different or new?
When is the last time you participated in any fashion in a critical incident management training class?
Well, every time I do an officer-involved shoot class, I do that.
When was the last time you conducted an officer-involved shooting class?
That would have been in Arkansas, no, Alabama, and that was last July.
And the time before that?
Was Ohio. It wasn't, I flew into Cincinnati, but it was a little town outside in Ohio. And that was probably March or April of last year.
How about Texas? Have you taught any or attended any critical incident management training classes?
Well, certainly did. I did 2 classes in the Houston area, Conroe and Sugar Land, Plano. I've done a class there.
What kind of class was it?
These are officer-involved shooting investigation courses.
Did you bring any of the materials from which you taught the class with you?
No.
Trip. Can you cite me how I could look that up?
Well, they're courses that I did. I can probably figure out when I did them.
Could you figure out the name of the course?
Yeah, it's Officer-Involved Critical Incident Investigations course.
Now, when you're using techniques and protocols to investigate what occurred is what you're doing, you're not really trying to determine reasonableness. Isn't that correct?
Well, certainly that's part of the scope of the investigation, but predominantly, like I said, it begins as a criminal investigation, and we're looking at evidence, and we're looking at the crime scene, and we're looking at the interviews, and we're looking at the information that is available, and through that, we begin to develop and understand the reasonableness of the actions of the officers that were present.
Just as the jury will do and has been doing already, correct?
Well, I'm sure they will, but part of any officer's training and background who goes to any police academy is run through understanding that the use of force has to have a reasonable component to it and involves probable cause.
What is the difference between what you can tell and what the jury can glean for themselves as they sit here? Assume your testimony is not given. Are they going to be hampered in figuring out if something was reasonable or not? Because that's going to be in the jury charge.
Well, certainly it will be. My background is just doing this so many times. I've investigated well over 300 officer-involved shootings where there were hits and kills.
What
So
can you offer that's critical for the jury to have from you in helping them, for them to be helped to determine the issue in the case?
Say that one more time, I'm sorry.
What is it you can tell the jury that they can't figure out for themselves?
My experience in doing this so many times.
And your experience somehow will aid the jury in figuring out the ultimate issue for themselves. Is that right?
I think it's that way with just about any expertise. Is someone that has a background in a certain area certainly brings something to the table that can be analyzed and assessed.
Well, if a physics problem had to be solved and understood by a jury, you would certainly need an expert with that, wouldn't you?
I suppose depends on the level of knowledge of the jury.
Well, assume that the hypothetical jury just went to high school and never took physics. And a physics problem would have to be solved to solve the ultimate issue. We would need an expert then, wouldn't we? Physics.
I would imagine, depending on the physics problem, sure.
Are you like the physics expert?
What types of physics are we talking about? I mean,
I like the physics expert. Does the jury really need you like they would need the physics expert for the physics problem?
Well, I suppose it depends on the type of physics, because I utilize physics in shooting incident reconstruction all the time.
Are you been peer reviewed?
Yes.
And when and what are those?
Well, when I write a report for a particular case, it's peer reviewed by another member of the Bevel Gardner Associates. I've been peer reviewed in the shooting incident reconstruction photography book that I was a co-author in. I've been peer-reviewed in the interview and interrogation book that I was published in.
So it's fair to say that you can comment on how things were done in this case, but you don't bring any extra special expertise that the jury doesn't have to determine reasonableness.
I can comment on the reasonableness of the actions based on training, based on policy, based on procedure, based on best practices.
Thank you, sir. I'll pass the witness.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. You may stand now. On the arguments, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor, at this time.
Very concisely.
Yes, Your Honor, at this time,
Hold on, let me ask first. What I'd like to know is precisely what ultimate opinion are you going to ask this witness, and upon which is that opinion based? What evidence have you provided to him that he's going to base that opinion? That's what I need.
yes, Your Honor, I will be asking this witness, the ultimate opinion will be whether or not he believed that the defendant's actions regarding the defendant's use of force was reasonable, given the information that was available at the time that the officers arrived on scene, the tactics, including everything that we witnessed on the video. That is the ultimate opinion I will be asking of this witness. The witness was provided the case discovery, which includes the reports, the statements, any transcripts that were available, including the body worn cameras, everything that we had in the DA's file.
I think what Mr. Fishburne was getting at is that this witness is in no better position, I don't want to speak for you, than a regular juror, somebody just, regular old person off the street. Okay, what say you to that?
I say that this witness is completely different than a regular person off the street based on his training and experience over 30 years within law enforcement. His primary duties of specifically looking at officer-involved shootings and critical incidents that it is a specialized investigation that the everyday common citizen off the street would not have, as it entails best police practices, things that are common to law enforcement that the everyday citizen would not be aware of.
Okay. I apologize, those are two questions that I have. Is there anything else that you want to tell me, argue?
I believe that was essentially it. I mean, other than this witness's qualifications, he has taught, he's been peer-reviewed. I believe that he is qualified as an expert to render this opinion.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fishburne, let's talk about the qualifications first. I think we'll start with that. You have, and as it relates to the opinion that this witness is going to give that the shooting was unreasonable, okay?
I do.
Okay. Start with
Mr. Priest will be testifying as an expert in soft science, and so the test will be, is his opinion something that the jury needs? A little bit beyond just helpful. He's got to have something to present that is beyond the ken of the normal juror. And the jury in this case will have seen and heard the same things that Mr. Priest has seen and heard. And they will be forming the same opinion, or they will be forming an opinion about reasonableness just as he has. They can do that without his testimony. He's demonstrated clearly with the hard science hypothetical that I gave. There is nothing that he can bring as a soft science expert to the jury that will be helpful to them. And he could basically supplant their role. And we all know that juries rely on experts to think for them. And so it would be better and more helpful if the jury was reliant on only the historical evidence and investigative data from the other of the state's witnesses. So he's not, I don't believe he's qualified.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. If there's anything else.
I would say if he is qualified, he should only be allowed to testify about critical incident management and officer-involved shootings only. And that when he's qualified in front of the jury, that their questions to him about his expert qualification should be confined to that which he brings to this trial, rather than all of the fields of expertise that he's just testified about. I don't believe any questions about tactics should be permitted, and I don't believe...
component about what's reasonable or not on that.
Sorry?
I mean, I took that to be a sort of a component part of what's reasonable, what the actions were that night, tactical considerations, and by that I understood it to mean where people were at certain times and giving the information that they had. Is there something different?
If he's using the term tactics in that way, then I agree with you.
Is that how you understood it to be?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, all right.
His testimony would be, it would also be time-consuming unnecessarily, because the jury can figure this out for themselves, and it would tend to be confusing to them. If, for example, an individual juror was applying themselves very hard, and they had an issue in their mind about a historical fact that they're using to figure it in their analysis of what was reasonable, they might tend to rely on something that the expert said in order to make that decision. He's just not an expert that would be helpful to the jury to determine whether Officer Hess's actions were reasonable and therefore justified, because we're operating with a justification defense. So you're really talking, you're getting close to him being able to tell the jury, yeah, I think Officer Hess is guilty. And so we don't believe that he should be allowed to testify.
All right, very good. Your objection to this witness being able to testify in the proffer, and in line with the proffer, is overruled. I do find him to be qualified. I do find him to be qualified to issue an opinion on an ultimate issue, that is whether or not the conduct that he observed based on the things that he reviewed was reasonable at the time that the conduct occurred. I'll give you a running objection to this witness. Is there anything else about this witness?
Nothing further with this witness, Your Honor.
Mr. Fishburne, anything else about this witness?
Yes.
Okay, because we're going to do the next expert next. All right, who's going to be up for the next expert?
I will, Your Honor.
And who is this?
Mark Johnson.
Okay, and who's going to be taking Mr. Johnson for the defense? You will, Ms. Madison? Okay. How you doing, sir? If you would, please come to the front of the court. And please raise your right hand. You swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes.
Please have a seat. Respond to the questions first from Mr. Lewis, perhaps also Ms. Madison, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis? You stood up like you wanted to say something.
I was just going to say thank you, Your Honor, and proceed.
Yeah, let me ask you this, and I don't know, Ms. Madison, are you familiar with this expert's qualifications? Okay. Then what I'd like to know are what his qualifications are, in a very succinct way, what his opinion is going to be, and upon what that opinion is based. Go ahead, Mr. Lewis.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Mr. Johnson, please state your name for the record and spell it for the court reporter.
Mark Johnson, M-A-R-K-J-O-H-N-S-O-N.
Mr. Johnson, what do you do for employment?
I am the president of Visual Law Group, and I also am a forensic technician and forensic consultant, as well as having expertise in forensic visualization.
And what does Visual Law Group do as an organization?
Well, we are a little bit different than the witness, the typical opinion witness that we just saw. We are probably more closely aligned to a surveyor or another technical expert, and when I testify, which is not that often because we are supporting opinion experts primarily in our work, but when I do testify, it's for foundation purposes in a case such as this where the issue is velocity and motion and position of the vehicles based on digital video and the other physical evidence we have.
What is your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree and then received a law degree. I have worked for the past almost 30 years in this particular field, where I have not only attended many workshops, but I have also taught college classes at a technical college in San Jose, California, and I was also appointed to be the chairman of the multimedia department, where I both continued to teach, but also hired and trained instructors and, when necessary, fired them. I also am a consultant for a number of public safety and forensic companies in the fields of metrology, which includes laser scanning or photogrammetry. I am a consultant for Faro Technology, which is one of the major purveyors of laser scanning, which is used by accident reconstructionists and forensic technicians. I am a consultant and also an appointed ambassador for the company Pix4D, which is one of the largest and most prominent photogrammetric software companies. I am a consultant for Input Ace, which is a digital video forensic analysis package. And I have taught workshops for law enforcement, insurance adjusters, engineers, and technicians over the past 27 years. As mentioned, most of our work ends up being part of a presentation or a trial presentation, and so I typically work under the direction and supervision of an accident reconstruction engineer, ballistics expert, whatever the particular ultimate specialty is. In this case, it was a little bit different. I was brought in at the recommendation of another forensic technician, and so I then retain the services of a qualified accident reconstruction expert who will use my data to express ultimate opinions in terms of velocity and motion in this case.
So you mentioned actually a few different forensic fields, but in this particular case, what is your expertise in?
In this case, it would be laser scanning, photogrammetric analysis, and also, to some extent, digital video analysis, although that pretty much falls within photogrammetry in this case, which is simply the extraction of data or measurements from imagery, and in this case, it's both photographs and the video from the body cameras that were worn by the officers.
Have you written any books or publications in these fields that you described?
I have written chapters in some forensic textbooks. I am a frequent speaker, presenter, where I have both presented and written articles in the field. My specialty is primarily devoted to photogrammetry and laser scanning, as well as the assembly and management of data within the confines of three-dimensional visualization or three-dimensional animation.
Are you a member of any professional organizations within these fields of expertise?
I'm a member of the International Association of Surveyors and Forensic, it's the IAFSM, it's the International Association of Surveyors and Forensic Metrologists. It's a big fancy name, but basically it's the primary organization of forensic technicians such as myself who work in the field of metrology, which is in the acquisition of data, collection of accurate scaled information that then, as I mentioned, is used by others to derive opinions based on their qualifications as engineers or ballistics experts or what have you. I'm also a member of the American Association of Trial Consultants, and there may be another organization in there, but those are the primary ones that I'm affiliated with.
And you've taught in these fields before?
Excuse me?
You taught classes in these fields before?
Oh, yes, and I have a couple workshops coming up. I've done a number of cases within the state of Texas. I don't believe I have testified in this state, but I've testified perhaps a dozen times. California, Kansas, Missouri, Georgia, New York. But in most instances, it's such as this where we've collected data or we've visualized data that is ultimately the subject of another expert's opinion, testimony.
Okay. What are some types of cases that you worked on prior to this one?
We work in both civil and criminal fields. Some of the more prominent ones, we did the big marine prowler jet that knocked down the ski gondola in Italy, and that was featured, our work was featured on 60 Minutes on CBS. I did some work on the second Menendez brothers murder trial. We did some pro bono work for the tower collapse in association with a collection of New Jersey attorneys who also were working pro bono. We've also done numerous cases for state agencies that typically are transportation. We've worked in criminal cases, most recently, we produced all the visualization for the Oakland warehouse disaster where 36 people were burned alive, and we worked for the prosecution in that case. I'd say we work about 50-50 in terms of both defense and prosecution, and same way on the civil side. We like to think of ourselves as agnostic, that we would produce the same data and the same information whoever hires us.
Okay. What were you asked to do in this case?
In this case, the issue was velocity of the vehicles involved, and so we had the advantage of 5 body cameras. 4 of them actually visualized the vehicle sufficiently to extract photogrammetric information and rotational motion of the tires. And we also were provided with a laser scan that was conducted by the Texas Rangers a couple weeks after this incident. Certainly it was fresh enough that the critical witness marks from spray paint that the officers and the investigating team did at the scene, and that was important to us because with that and the scene photographs, we could position precisely where the resting position of the Dodge Journey was, as well as the position of the police patrol car that was at the scene after it had moved forward before it was bumped by the Journey. This is a confined scene, and so we have the advantage. I always tell people in classes that the best case to work on for us are cases involving railroads, because the train can't leave those tracks, and so you have almost a defined path. In this case, it's not that far off because we know where the fence is, and it's still locatable precisely from the laser scan. We know where the Dodge Journey ended up, so we know the full length of travel that it made in its movements back and forth, and then of course we know the position of the patrol car. Our primary focus was to determine velocity from the point that the Dodge backwards from the fence until the shots were fired by Officer Hess. And so we did that, and we produced visualizations using the laser scanning and our computer CAD, our computer CAD program to recreate the motions so that it would be more easily seen.
Okay, so you mentioned the body-worn cameras, you mentioned the laser scan by the Rangers. Was there any other information that you were provided and relied on during the course of your analysis?
Yes, I was given the incident report, the crime report, the affidavits of the officers. Those weren't critical to the work we did, but we had that information. I also, on my own, visited the scene, did my own laser scanning at the scene, as well as a scan of the Dodge Journey, and also did photogrammetric work using a forensic drone. I think that's about all the information that we had regarding the case.
Crime scene photos, did you have those?
Yes, I thought I mentioned that, yes.
Okay. All right, so based upon all that information, were you able to put together basically an animation of this incident?
Yes, we did several things. We tracked the motion of the car in terms of the rotation of the wheels. This particular car is well visualized at a number of sequences during the scenario as it played out. And where we could get valid rotational data from those wheels, we were able to record it and able to document it on a frame-by-frame basis. So that's independent of the work that we produced to visualize the scene. And that itself was sufficient for Mr. Partain, the engineer, accident reconstructionist, to determine velocity. We also used the laser scan and our scan of the vehicle to create a three-dimensional visualization that is animated per photogrammetric staging from the body cameras, so that we could then, independent of our analysis of the video, see what the motion of the car looked like, and we applied a CAD program tool that generates velocity as the CAD model moves. And so we actually collected velocity information separately from the rotation of the tires and from the motion of the vehicle. Then finally, we did some stabilization of the video where we could actually track the motion of the video against the lattice work of the fence behind it. And that's a third method to look at the velocity and movement of the Dodge Journey, which was our primary objective in the case.
How reliable
Well, and accuracy is the critical thing, and in this case, you start with the laser scanning data, which is really hyper accurate, and Mr. Partain is a little more familiar with the accuracy of laser scanning, but it's certainly at sub-inch accuracy. And we also then acquired specifications for the Dodge Charger, which was the police patrol car, the Astro van. So in addition to scanning the journey, so we had precise measurements from manufacturer specifications as well as our own measurements so that we have all of our vehicles were to scale and the scene was to scale. And so I would say that the scene itself is sub-inch accuracy. So then we come up to determining the motion of the vehicle. Probably the best and most accurate determination of velocity comes from measuring and tracking the rotation of the tires, because we know precisely that the video runs at 29.97 frames per second. So that velocity is nothing more than time over distance. And we now have the time interval. It's very precise in this case because we actually have the specifications from the Axon Body 2 camera that was used, and it's quite good. The distance we were able to extract from the laser scan, and the motion of the car from the fence on to the point where the first shots are fired, we determined photogrammetrically from the multiple cameras. And so I haven't really thought of how I would quantify that accuracy, but I would certainly say, given the fact that our velocities were consistent with the different methods, most of the time we're dealing with what's essentially a walking speed, and I would say I'm very confident that that velocity is accurate. Mr. Partain can certainly express his opinion with regard to his qualifications as an accident reconstructionist. I don't want to pretend to be an engineer. I don't even want to pretend to be good at math, because I'm not. But I am very fastidious when it comes to metrology and acquiring data.
So what velocities are we talking about based upon the demonstrations that you put together?
You're looking at, and the most important velocity to us was from the motion from the fence backwards, because that was where we were told the decision was made to initiate the gunfire. And the motion backwards is essentially 2.5 to maybe a little bit above 3 miles per hour. Given that human walking speed is classified between 3 and 4 miles per hour, that's why I use the term walking speed. So the velocity of this car is low. You could certainly see that from your own eyes looking at the video, but to quantify it, that is the velocity range that we ended up with.
That's all the questions I have for this witness at this time. However, we have 3 demonstratives that we'd like to offer to this witness, and we'd like to show them to the court if the court would like to see them.
Okay, would you mind, what numbers are they going to be?
Exhibit numbers. And Ms. Madsen, do you know what he's talking about?
I don't know which ones. It was one of my questions I was going to ask him is which did you create? So
Yes, they're 139, 140, and 141. Your Honor, what they are so specifically they're labeled rotational average velocity. It's a video demonstrative. Second one is called sync with camera views, which is number 140. And then the third one, 141, would be velocity positions times to shots.
Okay. For purposes of this hearing, I'm going to admit those 139, 140, and 141. For purposes of this hearing, I'll take up full admissibility later on. And with that, I believe you passed the witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Ms. Madsen, whenever you're ready.
hi, Mr. Johnson. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
I understood 1/80th of what you said, partially because of the words and partially because of your speed. So I'm going to try to go back through, okay?
I'll speak slowly.
Okay. You were contacted by the state, or a colleague of yours was contacted by the state?
I was actually originally contacted by a couple forensic technicians, and as I mentioned, this particular organization that I'm a member of, we are very collegial. We share ideas. We also refer cases, and in this particular case, neither of the technicians either had the bandwidth or felt they had the expertise to handle this case. And so they said, would you be willing to consult in this case? They then passed my name to, I think Mr. Lewis was the one who first contacted me.
Okay, and what organization is this?
The International Association of Forensic Surveyors and Metrologists. It's IAFSM.
Okay, and what were you asked to do specifically?
I was asked, would it be possible to determine the velocity of the Dodge Journey in this case?
Okay, and in terms of your role of it, am I right? Did you determine the velocity, or is that the thing that your colleague did?
Well, I don't mean to step around it, but I'm not trying to hold myself out as an engineer or as an accident reconstructionist. However, acting with the accident reconstructionist, I certainly assisted in developing the velocity, and I specifically used the laser scanning in our CAD software with a tool that generated velocity data that was consistent with the other methods I mentioned. So in that sense, yes, I set up the computer program and I generated that velocity data. I also, though, asked Mr. Partain to specifically determine the validity of that software program and the tool, simply because I didn't want to be accused of trying to pretend to be an engineer. But so to answer your question, I'm very comfortable that I assisted in determining the velocity. I think Mr. Partain is a little more qualified to explain the methods that were used to extract velocity from this data.
It's a little of a which came first, chicken and the egg, correct?
I don't think I'd agree with that, but I'll let you say it.
I guess that's what I'm trying to understand is what are you the expert on? Are you the expert on gathering the data, or are you giving an expert opinion on the speed?
Yeah, I'll go back and say I'm very similar. Think of me as a surveyor. If I took a total station or a laser scanner and scanned this courtroom and I had to come sit up here and tell you that that desk is 4.5 feet tall, I could do so. And whether that then is ultimately important in the case, is, you know, I'm not going to express opinions about motivations, behaviors. I'm strictly a collector and provider of data.
Okay. And the items, what materials were you given to use?
Well, I'm sorry, you said what was I given?
What materials were you given?
I was probably first and foremost, the accident scene photographs, the Axon Body 2 body camera videos, the Texas Rangers Leica laser scan,
Can you spell that, please?
LEICA,
Thanks.
and then the incident and crime report that were generated apparently by the police department.
Okay, and I guess my question to you is the incident and crime report. Were you given the entire case file or just portions?
I'll tell you what I was given. I was given an incident report, a crime report, affidavits of officers, and I think one other document, none of which were critical to the work I did.
Mr. Johnson, will you just go through, these are a bunch of the crime scenes. Will you pull out which ones were critical to you in making your determination and set them aside? And then let me know if there were any additional ones that you found to be critical or even just important. And we can pull those for you as well.
Or can you have the three exhibits that were admitted to this hearing? We have a minute, so I don't forget. Thank you.
You have a very loud voice, so let's go there.
Okay, I was apparently given some that have the spray painted tire marks on both the Journey and the Journey and the Charger. I don't see those in these piles.
Do you have those, State? These piles, which of these piles
The-
did you rely on?
These are relevant.
Okay.
None of them have the marks that I mentioned that were more important to me. Are these in order, or, you know? Okay, so let's go to the bottom. These would be enough right here. These are yours, these are hers.
Okay, so these, you relied on these photos?
Yes.
Okay, and then these are the ones that,
Well,
I'm
no,
confused about piles.
These are the most important ones.
Most
that
important.
Mr. Lewis just provided to me.
Okay, and what are the others?
What are the what? Excuse me?
What's your other pile?
These were photos that are relevant, that were from the pile you gave me,
Okay,
and, you know, that's sufficient.
okay, so these are the ones that have already been admitted that are relevant, and these are the additional ones that were relevant, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mhm.
Have you seen this document?
Yes, I have.
These measurements, did you rely on these measurements at all?
I did not. I find them to be close, but I didn't rely on them and would never rely on them because we collect our data from more accurate methods, that being the Texas Rangers laser scan in this case.
And this document, did you create this document?
I did not.
Have you ever seen this document?
I have not.
This is gonna be the defense exhibit, the diagram we put in, what number is that? You've never seen defense exhibit 11?
I have not.
Are these measurements correct?
Since I haven't seen it, I would hesitate to endorse any measurements. And so, no, I would not be able to endorse it, but I have no reason to doubt it if you're telling me representing it is accurate.
I'm not telling you that, I'm asking you
Okay,
that.
well, then I'm saying, no, I didn't verify that and wouldn't rely on that.
Okay, well, will you just tell me what measurements you did rely on and what their lengths were?
Well, I could tell you better than that if you have, which I know you do, the Texas Rangers laser scan. Within a fraction of an inch, the locations of these tires and the positions of these vehicles are determined from that, which is much more accurate than a hand-drawn diagram.
Okay. I am not trying to catch you up, I'm trying to gather which information you actually relied upon.
Right,
okay?
and so I relied on the point clouds and in conjunction with these scene photographs, which show the resting positions of those vehicles.
Okay, so you relied upon the front tires of the stolen vehicle, this vehicle here.
Well, I don't know if it's the stolen vehicle, but I did rely on the two tire marks, front and back tire positions here.
This tire and this tire.
That's
okay?
correct.
In measurement against what?
I'm not sure what you're asking, measurement against what? That is the position of this vehicle, as you can see.
Okay.
We actually scanned this vehicle. We have this vehicle in a precise three-dimensional model, which we then positioned on top of these marks, which are accurately recorded in the Texas Rangers laser scan. So the position of this vehicle, and the same with the 4-tire designations for the Dodge Charger of the patrol car, those positions are extremely accurately, and I would, I'm not going to criticize you, but it's certainly more accurate than the measurements that you have here.
Okay. These are the Dallas Police Department's measurements.
Very fine,
I'm
yeah.
not asking you to rely upon them.
Right, and I'm not.
But am I correct that in order to decide the speed, you looked at the distance traveled and the time it took to travel that distance?
That is correct.
What was the distance that you relied upon?
I don't have it in front of me, but we certainly have it measured precisely, and I can pull it for you, but
Please do so.
Okay.
May the witness step down.
Do you have this information available?
No, I don't have it available. I'll see if I can get it tonight if you need it, but
Do you know any of the measurements you relied upon?
in my head, no, because we were working with what's essentially a virtual duplication of the scene. So I'm not asking what is the distance, the software is determining the distances. The computer point cloud determines the distances that you see here, the distance from the fence to where this vehicle rests.
I just want to know what that distance is.
Well, and I told you, I can't sit here and tell you, but if you need me to calculate it, we can bring in the point cloud and do those measurements.
Can you come tomorrow prepared to talk about all of the distances that were used?
Whatever Mr. Lewis asks me to do, I will do.
Can we have the court order him to come prepared with
What is-
all of those distances?
What is a point cloud?
And this has completely supplanted the old methods of total stations and.
Let's just pretend like I've
yeah,
never heard about
right, so.
Point cloud, what is it?
Yeah, and it's now become the standard, which is that you take a device called a laser scanner, it's mounted on a tripod. When you turn it on, a laser shoots out thousands of times a second, and it rotates and gets a complete 360-degree coverage. Every point that that laser bounces against is measured. And so you have millions, and in some instances, billions of points that all accurately measure the three-dimensional scene. As a matter of fact, some of my colleagues, in anticipation of this type of testimony, come into the courtroom before trial, set the scanner down, and they scan the courtroom and then show the judge and the jury. That's a great way to do it. I didn't do it in this case.
Oh, so when she's asking you about different distances, you have millions of measurements from this point cloud.
Right, I'm assuming, anticipating her question, she showed me those diagrams. I would be happy to determine how accurate those measurements are based on the point cloud. If
I don't think that she's trying to say that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're trying to verify whether that diagram is accurate. I think you're trying to get at what are your measurements. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So, do you have any, he's saying that there's millions of them. So, are there any specific ones that you're looking at?
I need the ones you used to calculate.
Well, then he's going to bring you in a million tomorrow, and I don't think I have time to go into all that.
Does it have a range?
I'm sorry?
Does it have a range?
Well, there are millions. It'd be the same thing. If you gave me a tape measure and took me out to the scene and said, Mr. Johnson, would you measure the distance from the fence to where the journey stopped? I can give you that measurement.
Okay, do you have the distance from when the journey shifted into reverse to the distance traveled at the moment the first shot was fired? Do you have that distance?
I don't have it in my head, but I certainly can acquire it.
You could acquire, can you acquire that? And do you
Sure.
understand specifically what I'm asking?
I do.
Okay, and then how far the journey traveled during the first volley of shots?
Right.
And then how far it traveled before the second volley of shots?
Okay.
And then I'm also gonna ask that you be prepared, because my understanding is in your exhibits, the ones that I was given, and I'm assuming it's the ones you created, you did calculate speed when the car reversed to ram the squad car? You did calculate that?
The software calculated it, yes.
Software. Do you have that distance from the moment the car turned on to when it collided with the police car?
Yes,
Okay, can you bring that?
sure.
From the moment it shifted into drive and rammed into the fence?
Okay, yeah, my only, and I don't want to quibble with you,
I'm
I have-
really not quibbling.
yeah, okay, and I have no interest in when a car shifts gears or anything. What I can tell you is when that car starts in motion until it hits the patrol car. I can tell you when that car starts in motion until when the shots are first fired, and I can tell you then the distance it traveled before the second shots, if that helps you.
Done. Can you bring all of those?
Sure,
Can you be here first thing in the morning so that I can see those?
sure.
And on both,
Are those contained in those exhibits, by the way? 139, 140, or 141?
ish,
I'm not sure. It's certainly, I'm not sure if I had a distance counter running, I had velocity. But we
Well,
could
if you
put a
have
ruler
velocity-
to it.
If you got velocity, then you have distance, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, we could figure it out.
I mean, the specific readouts are not on there, Judge, it's got a timer and it's got the velocity as the vehicle's in motion.
All right. I
that's
think,
exactly what I'm trying to get. The missing piece of this equation that I'm trying to get, Your Honor. Okay, Ms. Johnson, I'm gonna move on a little bit, okay?
Sure.
You can bring me those?
Yes.
Okay, but you do not agree with the measurements of, this is a blow up of the diagram I've already showed you, Defense Exhibit 11.
You showed me another one as well. Was it
Yes.
different than this?
I showed you two separate. One of them was the version of this,
Right.
okay? So this is Defense Exhibit 11. You don't like those measurements.
No, I didn't say, I just said I didn't, I'm not going to accept these measurements because ours are definitely accurate. I cannot comment on how accurate these are.
And these are different, therefore they're not accurate.
They're different in what regard? What are you saying? What are you asking me?
I'm really trying to
Okay,
speak your language.
Let me try to be helpful here.
Okay,
I see a measurement of 32 feet from what looks like the corner of the Dodge Journey to what looks like the fence possibly, although I'm not
but
100%.
if you will look there, they've made squares around the paint that you're referring to. The paint that's around the tires that you're referring to, this is making squares around it.
Okay, what are you saying about that?
Well, is it measuring, which distance is it measuring?
Well, it looks to me like they're measuring from the bumper of the Journey to the fence, is what it looks like to me.
Okay,
Now, I see you telling me 32 feet from these squares.
hear me say, I'm not telling you anything. This is the state's exhibit.
All right,
No, it's
That's
not.
the exhibit is not the state
It's
exhibit.
not in evidence. Let me ask you this, sir, have you ever seen that before?
I haven't seen this one before,
All
no.
right, then we're not talking about it anymore. It's outside the scope of this hearing.
Good. Okay, I'll move on.
Somebody created it. If it wasn't him, then somebody can come in and say, I measured it, it was 32 feet. Maybe he's wrong, maybe he's right, I don't know.
Correct. Your Honor, this exhibit was presented to the grand jury by the state.
That very well could be true. I don't have any doubt about that. He's never seen it. It's not-
It may be accurate, I just didn't test it, I don't
Please-
need that exhibit.
Excuse me, please.
I'm,
don't
s- I'm,
interrupt
s-
me.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. What I'm saying is, it may or may not have been presented to the grand jury, it may or may not be accurate, he may be wrong, I don't know, but that's a call it seems like the jury's gonna make, potentially.
And so, in being given these materials, what did you do with them? Did you just create the exhibits the state asked you to create?
Yeah, I guess.
What were you asked to do?
I was asked to determine the velocity of the Dodge Journey, and we did that.
And why did you create the visual exhibits?
Because the prosecutor wanted a demonstrative exhibit that he felt would be helpful for the jury to see what the relative positions of the vehicles were.
I'm trying to do this as quickly as possible. I know he wants 3 exhibits to show the court. They may very well be part of this. They have strange names, and I'm trying to figure out what exactly he created. Did you create these exhibits?
I'm sure I did. I didn't put that name on that directory, but that looks like those certainly look like yeah, those are our exhibits.
And who's our?
Who's what?
Who is our? You said these
Oh,
are
I mean
our.
Visual Law. I mean my company.
Okay, what about the other exhibit?
Same. This is a four times slow motion, which shows some of the velocity measurements from the wheels.
Okay, you created these 3.
I did.
What about the other expert, Mr. Partain? Did he create these with you?
No, he did velocity calculations independent of me. And he also confirmed the accuracy of our scale and distances that were used to create these exhibits. So I wanted him to confirm, which is the way we typically work, that a qualified accident reconstructionist will confirm the time, distance, and scale of our work is appropriate.
You said that you are a part of an organization called the American Association of Trial Consultants?
Yes.
What is that?
It's primarily it allows you to do CLE training for attorneys or law firms. We haven't done that in some time, but it's a professional organization, everything from jury consultants to expert witnesses. Primarily, though, it's trial tech people and
Basically a showcase of your work so attorneys can go and see if they want to hire you.
yeah, probably that's close enough.
Okay. How much have you billed on this case?
I wouldn't be able to tell you. I'm notoriously
You're the math guy, though.
huh?
You're the math guy, though.
No, I tried to make sure you understand. I am not the math guy.
Okay.
Mr.
Well, how
Mr.
much
Partain's the math guy.
How much do you expect it to be?
I don't know. I would have to. My hourly rate is I think $350 an hour, and it would be whatever those hours are.
And do you know about how many hours you've put in so far?
I'd have to be an estimate.
Okay. Can you get that information for me by tomorrow?
Okay.
Anything else you expect to testify to, Mr. Johnson?
Don't think so.
Are you sure you paused there at the end?
Yeah, I was just trying to think about.
Well, tell me what you're thinking.
No, I just we did a lot of work, and I'm thinking particularly of the drone photogrammetry we did. And no, I think it covers it with what I've testified to.
Are you going to have any opinions as to whether or not a vehicle traveling at that speed would be a deadly weapon?
No.
Are you going to have any opinions as to whether or not it would hurt someone?
No.
Did you, no further questions.
Mr. Lewis? All right, very good. You may stand down. I hear arguments of counsel.
Yes, Your Honor, briefly, just based upon this witness's background and experience in the forensic fields of laser scanning, photogrammetry, and digital video forensics, we would submit him as an expert in this field and ask the court to let us put on this testimony for the jury.
All right. Ms. Manson?
As well as the exhibit, Your Honor.
I think I need to hear from Mr. Partain before I can allow the exhibits to be in, first of all. But second of all, if you wouldn't mind, perhaps you can formulate, I heard 4 or maybe 5 things that you're requesting that he bring down tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
Could you make that into a list to give to him tonight? And we can address that and continue the hearing on his testimony in the morning, depending on what he brings to you. Okay?
Yes, sir.
So I'll hear arguments at that time. Who's going to do Mr. Partain?
I will.
All right, why don't you get him ready? Miss Wood, why don't we take 10 minutes? Let's take 7 minutes. Court's in recess.